There's a moment before the body, before breath, before name is ever spoken. And in that moment, you said yes, so not with words, not with logic, but with a knowing so ancient it didn't need explanation, a soul-level yes. Yes to the density, yes to the forgetting, yes to the grief that would come wrapped in human skin, yes to the beauty that would break you wide open, yes to Earth, in this exact timeline at this exact frequency. You didn't land here by accident. You weren't randomly assigned to this family, this body, this skin, this season in history. You chose this. And I know, some of it doesn't feel like a choice. The trauma, the poverty, the abandonment, the oppression passed down like unwanted heirlooms. The loop that keeps finding you even when you swear you've outgrown it. But that's the forgetting. That's what happens when the veil wraps itself around your memory and says, start from scratch. Not because the divine wants you to suffer, but because it wants you to remember anyway, from the inside out. With no map but your own soul's vibration. The contract didn't promise comfort, it promised catalysts. You chose people who would crack open your grief, because that was the only way your gifts could get through. You chose pain that would stretch your heart so wide it could finally hold compassion without collapsing. You chose losses that would strip the masks you learned to wear to survive, so the soul underneath could finally breathe. Not because you deserved to suffer, but because your soul knew that real awakening often arrives dressed like rupture. You didn't pick ease. You picked precision. The exact experiences that would crack the illusion and call you home. You chose the threads that would tangle you, so you could be the one who learns how to unweave them, for yourself, for your lineage, for the ones who'll come after you. That's why you came through this bloodline. That's why you carry these shadows. That's why your life keeps circling back to those patterns. This isn't dysfunction, it's a system override. The version of you that knew how to survive is shutting down so the real you can come online. You're not late, you're not lost, you're not being punished. You're standing in the middle of an agreement you made long before you could speak, and every part of your story, even the ones that hurt to tell, have been trying to remind you. You said yes. And now, you're starting to remember what that yes was really for. Here's what they don't teach you about time. It doesn't move in a straight line. You weren't born on a track with one narrow path forward. You were born into a web, a living network of timelines that shift every time you make a decision, every time you resist, every time you remember. Some of those paths are loud, dramatic, chaotic. Some are quiet and slow and invisible to anyone but you. Some you've already lived before. And when your soul chose this life, it didn't just say yes to one storyline. It said yes to multiple potential versions of this lifetime, all of them orbiting a core contract, a central theme. But how you move through that theme, that's fluid, that's up to you. There's the you that said no, the you that settled, the you that stayed quiet, the you that left early, and the you that broke the pattern. None of them are wrong, but some of them were never meant to be permanent. You ever feel like you've already lived something before it happened? Or had a choice in front of you that felt way too familiar to be random? That's not coincidence. That's memory leaking through the seams of timelines you brushed up against, but didn't fully live. We call it déjà vu. But it's not just a glitch, it's a tap on the shoulder. You've stood here before. Choose wisely. See, your soul didn't commit to a rigid path. It committed to a frequency, a vibration, a lesson, a transformation, and it gave you options for how to reach that. So when life feels off track, when nothing's going according to plan, when it feels like you're out of alignment or wasting time, pause. Because you might not be off course. You might just be standing at a timeline intersection. And the discomfort? That's the friction of threads brushing against your awareness, waiting to see which one you'll feed. which one you'll step into, which one you'll finally surrender to. Here's the truth. You can't miss what's meant for your soul contract, but you can delay it. You can dance around it. You can numb it. You can loop around it 1,000 times. But the contract doesn't expire. It just waits for you to be ready to remember. And when you do, the path realigns itself, fast. That's why quantum leaps feel like déjà vu, because your soul already walked it energetically long before your feet ever touched the ground. This is what timeline jumping really means. Not escaping your current life, not chasing something shinier, but remembering that alignment shifts reality faster than force ever could. So the next time you feel like your life isn't adding up, like you missed your chance or chose wrong, ask yourself, what thread am I feeding? What path am I pretending not to feel anymore? And what version of me is quietly waiting for permission to step forward? Because the truth is, you're not lost, you're layered, and every version of you is still inside the contract, just waiting to be remembered. You ever wonder why you've always felt a little ahead? Not smarter, not better, just tuned in. Before there was language for it. Before anyone explained intuition or energy or purpose. You felt it. You didn't need a guru or a guidebook. There was just something in you that already knew. As a child, maybe you had dreams that weren't dreams. Conversations with people no one else saw. A sensitivity that made you feel everything. Loud noises, people's moods, shifts in the room before they happened. You weren't dramatic, you weren't fragile, you weren't weird, you were remembering. You've probably carried that quiet frustration most of your life. Not because people were cruel, but because they were shallow, stuck in loops, comfortable in the surface. And there you were, asking questions nobody had answers for. Why does this feel fake? Why do I already know how this ends? Why do I feel like I've done this before? You weren't arrogant. You were ancient. You've walked through lifetimes. You've agreed to forget again and again so that this time the remembering would stick. Because that's the real flex. Not knowing everything, but choosing to return. And still choosing love. Still choosing alignment. Still choosing the hard path when ease would be easier to fake. You ever notice how some of your struggles don't match your current life? Fears that don't make sense. Longings that feel older than your body. Unfinished business that shows up in dreams, in art, in silence. That's not your imagination. That's your soul tapping the memory files. You're not new to this. You're just newly reactivated. And that's why this awakening has been so brutal. Not because you're weak, but because your soul is done playing small. You didn't come here to start from scratch. You came here to finish what your past selves began, to break what they couldn't, to heal what they didn't have the tools to touch, to forgive what was carried through generations without release. You're not carrying all this weight because you're cursed. You're carrying it because you're strong enough now to put it down. So if you've felt out of place, good. If you've struggled to fit in, you're not meant to blend. You're meant to break patterns. If you've questioned everything, that's your soul sharpening its tools. Because the truth is, you're not here to become something new. You're here to reclaim something eternal. You're not just growing, you're remembering who the hell you've always been. Earth is not just a planet, it's a classroom, and not one of those neat, structured ones. No whiteboards, no instructions, no one waiting with a gold star when you figure it out. This is a school of amnesia. The whole curriculum is, forget who you are, and then remember. Not by being told, but by feeling your way back through the dark. That's why none of this came with a manual. That's why you weren't handed clarity at birth. Because remembering doesn't hit the same when someone gives it to you. It unlocks something different when you find it inside your own bones. You came here knowing the risk, that you'd be born into systems that tell you to doubt yourself, that you'd be handed names, labels, expectations that don't fit, that you'd be taught to perform before you're ever taught to feel. You didn't fail the assignment, you were immersed in it. You were taught to conform, to obey, to stay small, and they dressed it up as normal. But somewhere deep inside you knew this world was offbeat. The people around you were repeating scripts. The rituals felt hollow. The emotions didn't match the energy. And you kept asking, is this really all there is? That's not rebellion. That's your remembrance kicking in. The loops you're stuck in, they're not punishment, they're reminders. Repetition is the soul's way of asking, are you awake yet? Not in your mind, in your pattern, in your nervous system, in your reactions, because every time you repeat a lesson, you're not failing. You're being offered a second chance to respond differently, to break the loop instead of obey it. That's why some of the most sacred moments in your life looked like breakdowns, looked like rock bottom, looked like loneliness, looked like I can't do this anymore. Because that's when the old program finally got quiet enough for your soul to speak. No distractions, no approval, just presence. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned to stop performing and start remembering. So if you're here now, questioning everything, feeling like nothing makes sense, tired of loops, labels, performance, good. It means the amnesia is starting to crack. You're not behind. You're breaking through. You're not crazy. You're waking up in a world that depends on you staying asleep. This school was never meant to feel comfortable. It was designed to activate you. And guess what? It's working. Let's be real. You didn't choose easy. You chose evolution. You didn't come here to coast. You didn't sign up for the cute version of growth. You signed up for the kind that shatters who you thought you were, so the real you could finally take the wheel. And maybe no one told you this, but that's why your life doesn't feel simple. That's why nothing fits the way it used to. Because you're not here to repeat. You're here to recalibrate. You chose the experiences that would crack your identity, the people who would trigger your wounds, the silence that would push you into remembering, the pain that would wake up your power, not because you're a masochist, but because your soul understood. Comfort doesn't create clarity, pressure does. And it's not just random pressure, it's soul-specific pressure, customized to squeeze the parts of you that are no longer true until they fall away. That's why you keep losing things you thought you needed. That's why the friendships don't hold. That's why the old version of success feels hollow now. You're not broken. You're in transition. You're in between lives within this one. The version of you that fit in was functional, but it was built in survival. And now, you're building something else. Not just a new life, a new rhythm, a new nervous system, a new contract with yourself. So here's what you need to hear. You're not weak for being tired. You're not behind for needing rest. You're not failing because you're in a void. You're shedding timelines like skin. You're unlearning performances that used to keep you safe. You're remembering your original agreement, the one that wasn't based on trauma or roles, or proving anything to anyone. And it takes time to re-enter your truth, not just spiritually, but physically. Your body has to catch up to your soul. And that part, it's slow, it's sacred. It's not for the timeline, it's for your return. So no, this path won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Because you're not just healing, you're evolving. And evolution isn't clean, it's messy, it's mystical. And most of it happens in the dark, but you're not alone in that dark. You're walking with every version of you that chose to wake up. Every ancestor who didn't have the chance, every thread of your soul contract that said, I'll go. I'll remember. I'll be the one. And you are. You already are. If you made it to the end of this, you're not just watching, you're waking up, not to a trend, not to a script, but to something you've carried all along. Your contract, your choice, your timeline. So don't rush to figure it all out. Sit with what shook loose. Let it breathe. Let it land. This isn't the end of the message. It's the beginning of your remembering. If this hits somewhere real in you, download the companion journal. It's not homework. It's an anchor. For the version of you that's been waiting to come forward, link in description. And when you're ready, the next episode is waiting. The resistance was the reminder. Because what you've been calling fear might be the GPS back to yourself. Drop a comment below. What part of your contract are you finally ready to reclaim? Subscribe if you haven't already. This series wasn't built for the algorithm. It was built for you, the ones who feel the whisper before the words, the ones who always knew, even if they couldn't explain how. Welcome back.